The truck slowly pulled away from the house on Maple Street, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the smell of diesel fuel. Sarah Henderson stood on the porch of her new home, holding a box labeled Kids Room, and smiling. The two-story house, with white siding and blue shutters, looked just like she had dreamed. A classic American dream in the quiet town of Cedar Ridge, Oregon. 7-year-old Ethan was running around the yard with Max, their golden retriever, exploring the new place. The boy was covered in freckles, with bright red hair that refused to lie flat. Max, a 4-year-old dog, seemed just as excited about the move. He was sniffing every bush, every tree, marking his new territory. Between two old oaks in the back of the yard, there was already a swing hanging, left behind by the previous owners. "Mom, can I build a fort here?" Ethan shouted, pointing at the trees. "Of course, honey, but let's unpack first." Michael Henderson carried another box of computer equipment out of the car. A freelance IT consultant, he was glad to move away from the noise of the big city. In Cedar Ridge, the internet was fast enough for work, and life promised to be calm and peaceful. Max suddenly stopped at the fence separating their yard from the neighbors. The dog sniffed the ground, let out a quiet whine, and started digging with his paws right at the fence line. Ethan ran over to him, but Max only looked up with intelligent, brown eyes and went back to digging. It was quiet on the other side. A one-story house with a neat garden looked empty. The first ones to greet the newcomers were the neighbors to the left, a young couple from the house with blue shutters. Lisa Carter was a pretty blonde around 25, but her eyes were red, as if she had recently cried. Next to her stood Danny, a man a little older with a tense expression on his face. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Lisa said, though her smile looked forced. "I'm Lisa. This is my husband, Danny. If you need anything, just ask." Danny nodded, politely, but it was clear his thoughts were elsewhere. He kept glancing at his wife with a mix of guilt and frustration on his face. "What a beautiful boy," Lisa said, looking at Ethan with a painful sadness. "Kids are such a joy. Danny and I are planning to—" She didn't finish the sentence because her husband suddenly grabbed her hand. "We have to go," he said. "See you later." They left, but even through the closed door, you could hear the muffled but clearly unfriendly argument resume. Sarah shook her head. It seemed the young couple was going through a rough time. On the right side of their yard lived Margaret Thompson, a neat-looking woman about 58 years old, wearing glasses and a gray cardigan. She appeared by the fence, while the family was unloading the last boxes and stood watching them with a look of cautious curiosity. "Welcome," she said politely, though not very warmly. "I'm Margaret, a retired librarian, moved here 2 years ago after I stopped working." She looked the family over carefully, pausing on Ethan. "Nice boy you've got. Just keep a close eye on him. These days things aren't as safe. Too many strange people around, especially online. You never know who lives next door." With those words, she went back into her house and pulled the heavy curtains shut behind her. Sarah thought the neighbors seemed a bit paranoid, but mostly harmless. A typical lonely retiree who watched the neighbors out of boredom. The friendliest of all was Walter Green, who lived in the house across the road. A man in his 60s with kind gray eyes and a wide, genuine smile. He came over to them with a plate of still warm homemade cookies and a bouquet of roses from his garden. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge," he said warmly, offering the treats to Sarah. "I'm Walter Green. I've lived here for several years, know the area well. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Ethan curiously looked at the friendly old man. Walter noticed and crouched down to be at eye level with the boy. "You must be the local explorer," he said with a smile, looking at the leaf fort Ethan was building. "I see you're already checking out the new place, and this is your loyal helper?" Max came up to Walter, sniffed his outstretched hand, and calmly let himself be petted. The dog clearly sensed the man's kindness. "His name is Max, and I'm Ethan," the boy said. "We moved from Portland." "Wonderful. You're going to like it here. It's quiet, peaceful, lots of space to play. I've got great apples growing in my yard, and in the fall the pears will be ripe. I'll make sure to share when they're ready." Walter seemed like the kind of neighbor every family would want. Kind, helpful, always ready to lend a hand. There was a special warmth in his eyes when he looked at Ethan, as if the child reminded him of someone he had once loved. The next 2 months passed in the pleasant routine of settling into a new home and a new life. Ethan quickly adjusted to the local school and made friends with a neighbor boy, Tommy Johnson, who lived 3 houses down. Every day after school he played in the yard with Max, building more and more complex forts out of fallen leaves, climbing the old oak trees and swinging on the swings. Michael set up work with his clients and got a few big contracts from companies back in Portland. Sarah started teaching at the local elementary school and was happy with the peaceful atmosphere of the small town. Walter Green quickly became almost part of the family. He often stopped by with some homemade baked goods, helped Michael with yard work, and taught Ethan to recognize different types of roses and how to take care of them properly. The boy got used to seeing the friendly neighbor by the fence almost every day. Walter always greeted him, asked how school was going, and sometimes gave him small gifts, books about nature, a set of colored pencils, a model airplane. "What a wonderful man," Sarah often said to her husband in the evenings. "You can tell he really loves children. It's a shame he never had a family of his own." Walter had indeed told them that he had spent his whole life working as an engineer at a big company in San Francisco, and after retiring, he decided to move somewhere quieter. He spoke little about his personal life, only occasionally mentioning that he had lost loved ones a few years ago, and now preferred the peace and quiet of country life. The only thing that worried the family a little was Max's strange behavior in the yard. The dog often returned to the same spot near the back of the property line, sniffing around, quietly whining, and sometimes digging at the ground. It was the same place he had started digging on their first day after the move. Michael thought there might be some chemicals in the soil, fertilizers, old cleaners, or solvents spilled by the previous owners. Such substances could irritate Max's sensitive nose and make him act anxious since he hated strong smells. October 2017 turned out to be unusually sunny and warm for Oregon. The oak leaves had turned yellow but hadn't fallen yet, creating a golden canopy above the yard. October 15th was just another Sunday, a day that would forever divide the Henderson family's life into before and after. Sarah was making stuffed peppers for dinner, occasionally stirring the onions on the stove and glancing out the window at her son playing in the yard. Michael was in his upstairs office trying to finish a complex project for a Portland IT company. The deadline was approaching fast, and the system still crashed during load testing. Ethan was spending the day in the yard, building his most ambitious fort yet out of fallen leaves. He gathered the leaves into big piles under the oak trees, stacked them into walls, made passageways and secret rooms. Max was helping with the enthusiasm of a 4-year-old dog, scattering leaves with his paws, jumping into the piles, barking happily, and running around the yard with his tail wagging. Around 4 in the afternoon, Sarah looked out the window to check on her son. Ethan was sitting under the largest oak tree, deeply focused on crafting something out of sticks and leaves, probably building a roof for his fort. Max lay nearby, wagging his tail contentedly and watching his little owner work. It was a typical picture of an autumn Sunday. Nothing seemed out of place. Suddenly the phone rang. It was her mother-in-law, Ellen, calling with her usual Sunday questions. How were things going in the new place? Did Ethan like his school? Were they missing the city? Sarah answered the call while standing by the stove where the onions were slowly frying, but soon, caught up in the conversation, she walked into the living room. She didn't notice how time flew by. The chat, as usual, dragged on. Ellen was lonely and loved to share the latest news, retell TV shows, and give endless advice. About 15 minutes later, Max suddenly ran into the room. The dog was clearly upset. He whined, tugged at Sarah's skirt, darted back and forth between her and the kitchen door. At first, she didn't understand what was going on, but then she caught a strong smell. Something was starting to burn on the stove. Sarah quickly said goodbye to her mother-in-law, rushed to the kitchen, turned off the burner under the scorched onions, and threw open the window to air out the smell. And then, as she glanced out the window without thinking, she noticed that the yard was empty. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Max was already standing at the door, staring tensely toward the fence and whining softly. The leaf fort was half torn apart, as if someone had hurriedly searched through it or simply left the work unfinished. The boy was nowhere to be seen, neither under the trees, nor on the swings, nor near the house. Sarah thought he had probably run inside to use the bathroom and went back to cooking, stirring the peppers in the pot. 10 minutes passed, then another 15. Ethan still hadn't returned. Something unpleasant pricked at her mother's heart. That instinct nature gives all mothers, the one that rarely fails. Sarah turned off the stove, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped into the yard. "Ethan, Ethan, where are you?" she called out, scanning the yard. Only silence answered, just the rustle of yellowing oak leaves and the distant sound of Mr. Johnson's lawnmower. He mowed his perfect lawn every Sunday at exactly 5 o'clock. Max ran up to her, but something in the dog's behavior was deeply troubling. The retriever darted between Sarah and the fence, whining and pawing at the ground. He kept running to the fence to sniff, then back to Sarah, then to the fence again. The dog was clearly trying to say something, but couldn't put into words what only he seemed to understand. "Michael," Sarah called into the house. "Michael, come here right now." "What's going on?" Michael came down the stairs with an annoyed look on his face. He had been pulled away from solving a particularly difficult technical issue at the worst possible moment. "Ethan is gone. He was playing in the yard, and now he's nowhere to be found." The irritation instantly turned to worry. Michael set his coffee mug down on the porch railing and quickly came down the steps. They searched the house methodically, checked every room, the basement where Michael kept old computer. They searched everywhere, through the attic stacked with boxes of Christmas decorations, every closet, under every bed, every place a 7-year-old might hide. But there was no sign of Ethan. Sarah ran to the Johnsons' house. Tommy was playing video games in his room and looked genuinely surprised when she asked, "Ethan? Haven't seen him since yesterday." "Why, Aunt Sarah?" "It's nothing, dear. If you see him, tell him to come home right away." By late afternoon, they had spoken to every neighbor on Maple Street. Danny and Lisa Carter were busy preparing for their wedding trip to Portland. Margaret Thompson was lost in a new novel and hadn't looked up from her book. Walter Green was working in his garage on an old Chevrolet, his clothes and hands stained with motor oil, supporting his story. No one had seen the red-haired, freckled 7-year-old. By early evening, they called the police. An officer arrived within 20 minutes and began taking notes. An hour later, Detective Connor O'Brien showed up, a tall man with sharp gray eyes, a specialist in missing children cases for over 2 decades. "Tell me everything from the beginning," O'Brien said. "Any strange phone calls, suspicious people, trouble at school?" The answers were all no. Ethan was calm, bright, a straight-A student, not the kind of child who would run away or play dangerous games. By nightfall, neighbors, police, and local church members had gathered near the Henderson house. They brought strong flashlights, warm coats, and thermoses of coffee. Search parties formed and fanned out in every direction, checking the school, the playground, every possible location a child might go. Max, their dog, began acting strange. He paced constantly, refused to eat, and returned again and again to the fence, pawing the ground. One officer explained that dogs often pick up on their owner's emotions and know when something is deeply wrong. By morning, nothing had changed. County search specialists joined the effort. O'Brien led a 6-person team. By midday, the story had made local news. A smiling photo of Ethan, freckles and all, was shown on TV screens across the state. O'Brien spoke again with every resident of Maple Street. The Carters' alibi, preparing for the wedding, was supported by receipts, photos, and witnesses. Margaret Thompson could quote her book word for word. Walter Green showed them the dismantled car and meticulously organized tools. All 3 passed polygraph tests. By midweek, the FBI got involved. Agent Jennifer Clark was blunt. After 72 hours, the odds of finding a missing child alive dropped significantly, but they weren't giving up. They began investigating anyone with past offenses involving minors, more than 200 in the state. Teachers, coaches, and any adults in contact with Ethan were screened. Scent dogs from Portland tried to follow Ethan's trail. It stopped. Cold at the Hendersons' backyard fence. Still nothing. By the end of the week, false leads began to pour in. A woman at a Portland mall was certain she saw Ethan with a strange man. Sarah and Michael rushed over only to watch surveillance. Footage of a father with a cranky toddler. "That's not him," Sarah whispered, and something inside her cracked. Another lead came from Seattle. A teacher thought her new student was Ethan. The boy had recently moved from Oregon, looked very similar, but his documents were all in order. A third lead came from a gas station camera 50 miles away. A man was seen filling his car. A red-haired child sat in the back seat. It matched the time frame. But 2 days later, they found the man, a traveling salesman on a routine drive with his son. Another dead end. By the second week, Ethan's story had reached national headlines. CNN and Fox sent crews to Cedar Ridge. The small town turned into a media circus. Journalists staked out the Henderson home, pestering neighbors for interviews. Sarah and Michael gave several interviews themselves, hoping the attention might help. On a national morning show, Sarah, barely holding back tears, pleaded, "Our boy is out there somewhere. If someone is keeping him, please, let him go. We need him. We love him." The tip line exploded with calls. Red-haired boys were spotted everywhere. Most tips led nowhere. Some were cruel. "Your son is dead," said one anonymous caller. "Forget him." Psychics even claimed they could find Ethan through supernatural means. Officers had to investigate every vision, scouring ponds and rivers. Nothing came of it. By the end of October, the search was scaled back. O'Brien assured the family the case was still open, but there were no fresh leads. The media moved on. Cedar Ridge returned to quiet, but for the Hendersons, the nightmare was just beginning. November brought the season's first snow and a wave of despair. Sarah kept the curtains closed. The light felt like mockery. Michael stayed glued to his computer, combing through missing children databases night after night. He didn't sleep. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands shook from too much coffee. The same groceries sat in the fridge. Neither of them ate. Sarah continued buying Ethan's favorite yogurts and drinks, only to throw them out weeks later. "You didn't sleep again," she said one morning, finding Michael at the table, eyes red and puffy. "There's new info from Denver. A boy who looks like Ethan." "Michael, stop," she interrupted, exhausted. "You're destroying yourself." "What else am I supposed to do?" he snapped, voice raised for the first time in months. "Sit back, pretend nothing happened. Our son is out there. Or maybe he's gone," Sarah whispered. The words felt like betrayal. Michael turned pale. "Don't you ever say that. Ever." Their grief had turned them into strangers. Instead of uniting them, it pulled them apart. Michael converted half the garage into a command center. Maps, age progression photos, diagrams. Sarah launched a Find Ethan group online. Within a month, thousands followed. Messages poured in from across the country. Every day brought a new sighting. Every tip a flicker of hope. Every trip ended in heartbreak. They visited 12 states that first year. Each false alarm chipped away at their spirits and savings. Their marriage was unraveling. They stopped talking, except about the search. Work, chores, even intimacy faded away. "We're losing each other," Sarah said near the anniversary of Ethan's disappearance. "Ethan would want us to find him," Michael replied, still staring at his screen. "What if we never do?" Michael turned to her, his face hollow, aged beyond his years. "Then we'll search forever." Even Max had aged. The once lively dog now moved slowly, barely ate, and spent hours lying by the fence where he last played with Ethan. He stared into the distance, waiting. The second year brought more false hope. In March, a lead came from Los Angeles. A boy at a shelter matched Ethan's description and didn't remember his name. Sarah and Michael rushed to California. The boy looked just like him. Red hair, freckles, the right age. But when he turned around, "It's not him," Sarah whispered, and something inside her broke. He had amnesia after a car crash. His Canadian parents had died. Another hope shattered. Another sleepless motel night. Sarah weeping into her pillow. Michael staring at the ceiling, asking how long this could go on. That summer, a lead came from a private school in Sacramento. Michael went alone. Within a minute, he knew it wasn't Ethan. The third year brought the cruelest blow. In November, the Portland morgue called. A boy's body had been found. Right age, right clothes. Sarah refused to go. Michael went alone. The DNA test came back. It wasn't Ethan. Just another coincidence. In the fourth year, Sarah took indefinite leave from teaching. She could no longer face classrooms filled with children. Michael's work suffered. He lost clients, took loans to keep the search going. They had followed more than 1,000 leads, traveled to 30 states, spent every dollar, fell $40,000 into debt. The fifth year brought a new obstacle. Detective O'Brien retired. His replacement, Mark Thompson, lacked the same drive. "I understand," he told them during a meeting, "but realistically, the chances of finding your son alive are close to zero." On the 5th anniversary of Ethan's disappearance, a local article featured the family that refused to give up. Hundreds of letters poured in, many with small donations. With the funds, they launched a nonprofit, Voice of Hope, for families of missing children. "We couldn't find our son," Sarah said at the foundation's first meeting, "but maybe we can help others find theirs." And in doing so, they began to rediscover meaning in their pain. The 6th year brought major changes to Maple Street. The newlywed Carters divorced. Their marriage couldn't withstand the constant closeness, to tragedy and the pain of knowing they could never have children of their own. Lisa moved in with her mother in California, and Danny sold the house and moved to Seattle. The Harrisons moved in next. Robert, Jennifer, and their 3 children, aged 5 to 10. Michael and Sarah introduced themselves on the first day. By now, they told Ethan's story almost automatically, like a rehearsed speech. They showed photos, explained what to watch for, and asked them to report any suspicious people or situations. Jennifer Harrison cried as she listened. She instinctively pulled her children close, as if to shield them from possible harm. "I can't even imagine," she whispered through tears. "How have you survived this? How are you still standing?" "We haven't," Sarah answered honestly. "We're just still here, one day at a time." The Harrison children played in the yard just like Ethan once had. Their laughter drifted through the windows of the Hendersons' home, bringing with it a bittersweet ache of memory. Margaret, the former librarian, had gradually stopped going outside altogether. She no longer greeted the neighbors, only occasionally watched the street from behind the curtains, quietly, intently, with an expression that made many people uneasy. Walter Green remained the only constant in their world. Over 6 years, he had become almost a part of the family, always ready to help, offer sympathy, ask about the latest updates in the search. He had aged noticeably, more gray in his hair, deeper wrinkles, a slower walk. But he still tended his garden, tinkered with cars in his garage, and kept up good neighborly relations. Still, Michael had started to notice one odd thing. Whenever the Harrison kids played in the yard, especially 7-year-old Emily, who was closest in age to missing Ethan, Walter always found a reason to come out to the fence. He would stand there and listen, a tense, almost pained expression on his face. "Maybe the kids just remind him of his loneliness," Sarah explained. "He seems to have no one left. How sad it must be to be all alone." The 7th spring came unexpectedly early. March 2024 was unusually warm for Oregon. The snow melted by mid-month, revealing soft earth and the first shoots of green grass. The air smelled of spring and renewal, scents that had once brought joy but now only reminded them that life continued, no matter their personal tragedy. By then, Max had truly become an old dog. The 11-year-old retriever moved slowly and spent most of his days lying on his bed inside the house. But whenever he went outside, he still headed to the same spot by the fence, where he had last played with Ethan 7 years ago. And then, one day in March, the old dog suddenly sprang to life. Max began digging at the ground by the fence with a fury they hadn't seen in months. He clawed at the earth with his hind legs so frantically that clumps of dirt flew in all directions. He whined, yelped, and barked, loudly, insistently, as if trying to tell the humans something they couldn't understand. Michael looked up from the garden beds he was preparing for the new season and frowned. After 7 years, he was used. To his dog's quirks, but this kind of energy was something Max hadn't shown in a long, long time. "What's going on, buddy?" he muttered, wiping his hands on his jeans and walking toward the dog. Max was digging in the exact same spot he had dug on the day their world fell apart, the day Ethan disappeared. "Michael!" Sarah called from the house. "What's going on with Max? He's barking so loudly." Sarah's voice had changed. Over the years, it carried a weariness now, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. Gray strands streaked her chestnut hair, and fine lines had deepened around her eyes. Time had not been kind to the mother of a missing child. Michael tried to pull the dog away from the fence, but Max wouldn't budge. In fact, the old dog looked more agitated than ever, as if urgently trying to communicate something. "Help him," Sarah said, stepping into the yard and taking in the scene. Maybe he smelled something. After years of searching, they had learned to pay attention to every sign, no matter how small. Too often, tiny details had led to important discoveries. Granted, all of them had turned out to be false leads, but hope, as they knew all too well, dies last, and they had already helped other desperate families cling to it. Michael brought a shovel from the shed. The ground was tough, spring in. Oregon always began with soil hardened by the winter frost. But after a few minutes of determined digging, the shovel hit something solid with a dull thud. Sarah gasped when a piece of white bone appeared from the dirt. That's not... She couldn't finish the sentence, her hand pressed tightly to her throat. Michael carefully dug out the bone. It was large, clearly from a big animal. A dog's shoulder blade, if he remembered his anatomy right. They looked at each other. After 7 years, they had learned not to hope too much. They had endured too many false hopes, too much pain. But Max kept digging, even more furiously. Now. He moved slightly to the side and began tearing at a new spot in the soil, whining and yipping with excitement. "Maybe a few animals were buried here?" Sarah suggested. "Or one big one," Michael replied, continuing to dig. Within half an hour, they had uncovered several more bones, all canine, all quite old. Michael immediately thought of Walter. Green. He remembered the neighbor once mentioning he had a very smart dog before they met. "I'll go ask Walter," he told Sarah. "See if this could have been his dog." Michael walked over to the elderly neighbor. Walter, as always, met him on the porch, neatly dressed, polite, with an expression of genuine interest on his face. "That's my old dog, Rex," Walter explained after Michael told him about the discovery. "I buried him about 10 years. Maybe a little more. He was a wonderful dog, a German shepherd. Lived with me for 14 years. But why did you bury him on our property?" Michael asked, a bit surprised. Walter smiled sheepishly, like a child caught in a harmless prank. "Well, strictly speaking, that used to be the edge of our lots. Rex loved lying in that exact spot, in the shade of your oaks, especially on hot summer days. I thought it would be a fitting place for his final rest. I hope you don't mind." The explanation sounded perfectly reasonable and logical. Many people bury their pets in their favorite spots. Michael assured the neighbor it was no problem. They understood how he felt. "How's the search for Ethan going?" Walter asked, as he had done at every meeting for the past 7 years. "Any new leads?" Michael shook his head. "Unfortunately, nothing significant. But we're not giving up. We still hope." "He was such a great kid," Walter said, looking toward the Henderson house with a sad expression. "Always greeted me politely when he saw me. Well-mannered, smart boy." "You raised him well." Michael nodded silently. Every time someone spoke about Ethan in the past tense, something inside him tightened. as if the whole world had accepted the idea that their son was gone. Everyone, except them. When Michael returned home, he found that Max still hadn't calmed down. The dog kept digging in different spots along the fence, as if searching for something specific. By evening, the old retriever looked completely exhausted, but he wouldn't stop. "What's wrong with him?" Sarah asked, watching the dog with growing concern. "Should we take him to the vet?" "Let's wait until tomorrow," Michael decided. "See how he acts." But the next morning, Max started digging again, this time in a different spot, about 2 steps from the original one. His behavior became even stranger and more urgent. He whined, whimpered, and looked at Michael and Sarah with eyes that seemed to beg them to understand, to help. The following days were filled with growing tension. Max continued his digging with a persistence that bordered on obsession. He had visibly lost weight, hardly ate, and drank only water. He spent most of his time by the fence digging in various spots. Veterinarian Dr. Clark came to the house and carefully examined the dog. Physically, Max was healthy for his age, but his behavior certainly raised questions. "He's acting like a dog that's detected something specific," Dr. Clark explained. "Their sense of smell is millions of times more sensitive than ours. He might be picking up on something we simply can't detect." A week after the first discovery, a truck from the city administration pulled up in front of their house. 3 men in work clothes got out with surveying equipment. The city was planning to install a new sewer pipe along their street, and the surveyors needed to precisely mark the boundaries of each property. Michael took the opportunity. He approached the lead surveyor, introduced himself, and asked if they could also scan the spot where Max had been digging so intensely. "No problem," the man agreed. "We've got a ground-penetrating radar. It can show us everything underground." The GPR was an impressive piece of equipment, a compact device on wheels that could scan soil up to 5 meters deep and display underground objects on a screen. "Very interesting," the lead surveyor said, carefully studying the radar's readings. After rolling it over the area Max had been digging, "There's definitely something down there, something large and metallic, about 2.5 meters below the surface." Michael's heart skipped a beat and started pounding faster. What could it be? The surveyor shrugged. "Hard to say without proper excavation. Could be an old septic system or some kind of abandoned utility. Or maybe someone buried a car or a large piece of machinery long ago." He looked at the screen again. In rural areas you see all sorts of things, but the shape of this object is odd, almost square, and fairly compact. "Can you tell how long it's been down there?" "Judging by the readings, quite a while. The soil around it is tightly packed with time. I'd say at least 15 years. Maybe more." Michael thanked the surveyors and immediately called O'Brien. The former detective listened carefully to the report about the metal object underground and promised to arrive within the hour. "Though I wouldn't get your hopes up too high," he warned. "It's probably just some old utility line." O'Brien didn't come alone. He brought with him a young detective, Mark Thompson, who had formerly taken over Ethan's case. After O'Brien's retirement, Thompson was skeptical. "The chances that this is in any way related to the boy's disappearance are nearly zero," he said, as he studied the ground radar readings. "But since we're here, let's take a look." O'Brien examined the scan data carefully. His experienced eye caught something the younger detective had missed. "This doesn't look like a septic tank or a water line," he said thoughtfully. "It's too compact and perfectly shaped, and the depth is strange, too deep for standard utilities, but not deep enough for major infrastructure." "What do you suggest?" Michael asked. "We dig, but carefully and methodically, if this is actually connected to your son's case." He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood what he meant. The next day, Michael rented a small excavator. Thompson arrived with a team of specialists, a few police officers, a forensic expert, a fire department inspector to monitor air quality, and a technician with professional equipment. "If there's really something down there, we have to follow protocol," O'Brien explained to the parents. "Any misstep could make potential evidence inadmissible in court." The excavation began early in the morning. Michael operated the excavator with extreme caution, removing the soil in thin layers. Every 30 minutes, work was paused so the forensic specialist could descend into the pit and examine the newly exposed soil layer. Max sat nearby, watching everything closely. In his old brown eyes was something almost human, a look of understanding, as if he knew the people had finally grasped what he'd been trying to tell them all along. An hour into digging, the excavator bucket hit something metallic with a loud clang that echoed down the quiet morning street. Michael immediately shut off the engine and jumped down to clear the object with his hands. Gradually, the edge of a metal structure emerged from the soil. After another 30 minutes of careful digging, a compact metal hatch was revealed, embedded firmly in the earth. It was heavily rusted from years underground, but still solid. The hatch had a heavy handle and a lock nearly disintegrated from time and moisture. "What is that, for God's sake?" Sarah whispered, staring at the strange discovery with wide eyes. O'Brien knelt beside the hatch and examined it closely, brushing away the remaining dirt with an old toothbrush. "Looks like the entrance to a Cold War-era fallout shelter," he said thoughtfully. "Back in the 50s and 60s, a lot of Americans built these in their backyards. They were afraid of nuclear war with the Soviets. But why would—" "The dog," Sarah began. "Because someone's down there," O'Brien interrupted quietly but firmly. "Or was recently." He pulled out a tactical flashlight and shone it into the narrow gaps around the hatch. A faint stream of air drifted out. "The ventilation system is working," he noted. "This is definitely not just an abandoned bunker." The police initiated the opening procedure. Thompson had to request a warrant from a judge, which took another 2 hours. During that time, a small crowd of curious neighbors and journalists gathered near the house. Someone had tipped off the local press about the unusual find. Sarah sat on the ground, hugging her knees. Michael stood nearby, gripping Max's leash. His hands were shaking. The hatch glinted in the sunlight. Everything felt far too quiet. "If it's him," Sarah whispered, "do you want to be the first to see?" Michael nodded, unable to speak. He sat down next to his wife, and together they stared at the rusty metal, like it was a sealed coffin they were afraid to open. "We need to know something," she added. The forensic expert took dozens of photos of the hatch from different angles. Then O'Brien made the call to break the lock. "Everyone step back to a safe distance," he ordered. "We don't know what's down there." The rust-eaten lock shattered after a few strikes with a sledgehammer. The lid turned out to be surprisingly light, clearly designed to be opened from the inside, even by a woman. The hatch creaked open, revealing a black hole in the earth and releasing a wave of stale air that hadn't changed in years. The smell was strange, not musty like a basement, but more like a long-sealed, yet lived-in room. O'Brien cautiously shone his flashlight downward. The beam caught metal steps disappearing into the depths. "I'm going down first," he said, putting on a protective mask and checking his radio. "Stay clear until I give the signal." The descent seemed endless. 10 agonizing minutes passed, broken only by O'Brien's careful steps and occasional, muffled radio check-ins. Then his surprised voice echoed from below. "My God, it's a real bunker. Fully equipped, someone definitely lives down here." Sarah's knees gave out. Michael caught her before she collapsed. A few minutes later, sounds rose from the depths. Footsteps, voices, furniture scraping, doors creaking. Then came a voice from below, like a child's but older, a teenager's. "Is someone out there? Is it safe? It's not radiation." Sarah dropped to her knees beside the dugout hole. That voice. It was deeper than it had been 7 years ago, but the tone, the way he formed words, it was painfully familiar. Detective O'Brien emerged from the hatch. Behind him stood a teenager, thin, pale, with grown-out red hair and freckles that now stood out starkly against skin that hadn't seen sunlight in years. He looked older than 14, his face too serious, his eyes too alert. The boy squinted in the daylight he hadn't seen in so long. He shielded his eyes, trying to adjust. His clothes were clean but clearly handmade. Jeans and a sweater mended and resized many times. "Where's Grandpa Walter?" he asked in a trembling voice, glancing around in panic. "What happened? Did the war end? Did the enemies find us? Why is it so bright?" "Ethan," Sarah whispered, rising slowly. "Ethan, it's Mommy. Do you remember me?" The boy jerked back, instinctively pressing himself against O'Brien. Panic filled his eyes. "You're not my mom," he said, staring at Sarah like she was a stranger. "My mom died 7 years ago when terrorists bombed our city. Grandpa Walter told me. He showed me pictures. Your enemies, Russian agents. You've come to take me to the experiment camps." O'Brien gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Ethan, listen to me very carefully," he said, crouching to the teen's level. "There was no war, no terrorist attacks. These people, these are your real parents. They've searched for you for 7 years. "That's not true," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. "You're lying. Grandpa Walter said terrorists attacked America, that the cities were destroyed, that only bunker survivors lived, that only he could protect me." At that moment, Walter Green stepped out of his house, moving like a man who knew the web of lies was collapsing. Seeing the crowd around the hatch and Ethan in the sunlight, he froze. His face showed complete hopelessness. His shoulders slumped. Ethan saw him and ran, stumbling over uneven ground he wasn't used to. "Grandpa! Grandpa Walter!" he cried, throwing his arms around the old man. "Why are they saying there was no war? Where are our allies, the rescue teams?" Walter hugged the boy with trembling arms and looked up at the gathering crowd. Tears streamed down his face, vanishing into his gray stubble. "Forgive me, Ethan," he whispered. "Forgive a sick old fool." O'Brien approached slowly. "Walter Green," he said in a weary tone, "you are under arrest on suspicion of child abduction and unlawful confinement. You have the right to remain silent." But Walter wasn't listening. He looked only at Ethan. "I never meant to hurt you," he said through tears, stroking the boy's red hair. "I just couldn't be alone anymore. Not after losing my family." "What family?" O'Brien asked sharply. Walter shook his head. "I lost them in 2016, in the Nice terror attack. My wife, Elizabeth. My son, David. My daughter, Anne. We were on vacation when the truck hit the crowd on the promenade. They died instantly. I was the only one left." "I saved him," Walter said, locking eyes with O'Brien. "I didn't let him die in a world that had already burned. I protected him from the chaos." From his fragmented statements, a horrifying picture emerged. Walter Green, once an American engineer, had lost his entire family in a terrorist attack in France. Grief slowly eroded his sanity. He moved to Cedar Ridge for peace. But the pain never left. As the news filled with reports of rising tensions, terrorism and danger, something inside him finally broke. He began preparing for the end. Ethan was taken to Cedar Ridge Hospital for a full evaluation. Sarah fainted upon seeing her son and was hospitalized too. Physically, the boy was surprisingly healthy. Walter had taken excellent care of him. But psychologically, the damage was deep. Dr. Elizabeth Harris, a seasoned child psychologist, said she'd never seen anything like it. "This isn't just abduction," she explained. "This is 7 years of brainwashing during the most formative years. The recovery will be long and difficult." The first days were a nightmare. Ethan refused to believe Sarah and Michael were his real parents. He begged to be returned to Walter. The breakthrough came with Max. The old retriever walked into the hospital room, sniffed the air, and whined softly. Then he padded to the bed and rested his muzzle on Ethan's lap. The boy froze. His hand found the familiar head, his fingers threading into silver fur. "Max," he whispered. You're really my Max." The dog wagged his tail and gently licked the boy's hand. It was the first step toward truth. Another came with a slice of apple pie from the hospital cafeteria. Ethan bit into it and paused. "That taste," he murmured. "Someone used to bake this." Sarah rushed in the next day with her old recipe. Ethan took a bite, then another. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "Mom," he whispered, this time meant for her. Memories returned in pieces. Perfume, bedtime stories, laughter. The healing was slow, but it began. A month later, Ethan walked into his old home on Maple Street. His room had been preserved like a museum. Everything familiar, everything foreign. He was afraid to go out. Light hurt his eyes. Crowds triggered panic, but Max stayed by his side. In November, Max passed away under his favorite oak tree. Ethan found him and cried. Real tears. "He saved me," Ethan said. For 7 years he never gave up. They buried Max in the yard. Michael made a gravestone. Max Henderson. Loyal friend and true hero. Walter was sentenced to mandatory psychiatric treatment. Sarah and Michael didn't seek harsh punishment. They understood his brokenness. By 15, Ethan had learned to live with his past. He planned to study psychology to help children heal. After a documentary aired, the Voice of Hope Foundation received over $1 million in donations. In 1 year, they helped find 23 missing children. Ethan spoke at events. Never give up, even when there's no hope. Don't give up. Michael planted an oak tree where the bunker once stood, a symbol of hope from tragedy. Every Sunday they visited Max's grave. "You know," Ethan said one Sunday, "maybe it had to happen, so I could help others." "No one deserves a childhood like that," Sarah said. "Maybe not, but it taught me to treasure every moment and showed me what real love looks like, never giving up." Ethan looked at Max's grave. To keep searching, keep believing, keep digging, until you find what you're looking for. Evening fell over Cedar Ridge. The family walked home along Maple Street. They had survived. They had found each other. Their house glowed with warm light, and where the bunker once lay, a young oak tree grew. Somewhere in a psychiatric hospital, old Walter Green looked up at the stars and prayed Ethan was happy. And somewhere between earth and sky, the spirit of an old retriever wagged his tail. His mission was complete. He had brought the boy home. Love had proven stronger than time. Loyalty, deeper than despair. And hope, brighter than any darkness.